Thank you very much for having me here. Ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, dear organizers, Karen, thank you very much for this opportunity. My name is Miklós Szánthó. I'm a lawyer, a political analyst, and the director of the Budapest-based Center for Fundamental Rights. It's the only one conservative legal think tank in Hungary. And to tell the truth, I prepared and thought that I will deliver the toughest speech today here, but it seems that the other ones have already done that. Thank you very much for those great speeches a few minutes ago as well. In Hungary, the situation is not so bad if it comes to multiculturalism or political correctness. But of course, it seems to me that we all can feel in our bones that major changes lie ahead of the transatlantic civilization. Maybe the generations following us will not be able to recognize this civilization in the manner that we see it. Our current political institutional structure, the spiritual foundations of the society, and the individual civil liberties are under a multi-pronged, multi-structured, and professional attack. This is a hybrid warfare. And behind these attacks, we discern international, often virtual, and as such, unidentifiable networks. And the not-so-secret ambition of these attacks is to create, in the perhaps not-so-very-distant future, an open society, open to aberrations of all kind, multicultural, and devoid of nations. The supreme authority, the sovereignty in this dark future would fall to unelected international, federal, or global organizations, and maybe to tech giants, rather than the peoples and states. The goal is to outsource competences and power from national level to higher entities. Who wins the future? Where will the supreme authority lie? These are the most pressing questions of our times. Those who are brave enough to act today will be the ones who can provide the winning answers. And yes, we need to act today. Moreover, we should have acted yesterday. The noisy pacifist generation of '68 stepped up their efforts towards their interests long ago, and as we can see it, they managed, as the obstinate but persistent often do, to change so much in the Western culture. And they want to change so much more. First of all, the focus point of the globalist progressives is the dismantling of national identities based on the principles and community and the erosion of state sovereignty. This, according to them at least, is the exclusive way of historical progress, and they say that a wonderful Pax Globalis will replace the Westphalian system of international relations, itself, according to them, just a few centuries old. But there is more than meets the eye. It is not only that they wish to water down state structures, it is also about the internationalization of the national order, which in turn means that the feeling of having roots in the local and in the bordered territory is replaced by the attitude of the cosmopolitan, global citizen, unbound to space and time and without substance. And this is also why they strive to abolish history, or at the very least to create politically correct stories about history. When nation is a community with a history, the name we give to our shared memory. As in the Old Testament, when the Most High divided to the nations their inheritance, when he separated the sons of Adam, he set the bounds of the nations. And this is why walls and fences protecting the boundaries of nations are such painful symbols for them, for the progressives. The walls and fences are expressions of the territoriality of the state, its border nature, and its first responsibility, protecting the national home. A state's sovereignty could be reduced by attacking its territory, traditional warfare is an example, so might it come under assault through changing the composition of its population. By mixing the population with masses of people belonging to an entirely alien culture arriving in rapid, uncontrollable floods, a hybrid society is created. Original national identity disappears and multiculturalism dominates the land. Thus, they strike at one of the pillars of sovereignty, the population. And they also prepare for unifying countries of mixed societies in some grand, federal, or global universal structure, such as the dream of the United States of Europe. Secondly, we must also remember the institutional side of internationalizing national order. A so-called global constitution is in the process of being created by a business network of transnational organizations, international advisory bodies, academic actors, political NGOs devoid of all legitimacy, as well as courts regularly overstepping their authority. The substance of this is that in the name of human rights fundamentalism, they transform pure human desires into fundamental rights, thus creating the vague categories of the so-called international standards or European values and turning them into an arsenal of political weapons. These standards and so-called values, ostensibly neutral or objective, are interpreted as nothing more than tenets of the progressive worldview. And recalcitrant but democratically elected governments, such as the Hungarian one, are often ostracized based on such manipulated values. In a highly anti-democratic manner, the aim is to create a plastic source of legitimacy amenable to them. Thus, the source of legitimacy is no longer the people. Governments need no longer submit the will of the people expressed through elections, but much more to this progressive, global, quasi-constitutional regime. And moreover, the agenda aimed at changing our civilization goes beyond the international, legal, or political institutional framework. It touches the intellectual and spiritual foundations of our society. What I mean is the popular culture of consumerism and the show business. Advertising, billboards, blockbuster movies, YouTube videos, and many other platforms, we collide with them every waking hour of every day. All these serve to sensitize society towards the freshly discovered rights of many artificially made-up minorities. They propagandize multiculturalism and flirtation with alternative forms of cohabitation. This is a form of creeping political PR which, through openness, enlightenment, science, and tolerance, bases itself on unbound individualism, egalitarianism, and self-fulfillment. The message is, in order to be fashionable, you have to be like this. This marketing warfare is part of the concept of how to use soft power, which often surreptitiously undermines such Christian conservative values as tradition, family, nation, loyalty, camaraderie, altruism, authority, common sense, or faith. They tune the mind towards the broadcast frequency of open society. Ladies and gentlemen, next let us observe that the global order we believe in, founded upon national identity and state sovereignty, faces challenges not only from traditional, institutional, or ideological sources. There are also the digital data integrators of the global establishment, the IT or tech giants. Totalitarian states of the 20th century could only dream of such power that they have. And there is a real danger that in the increasingly virtual world that we live our lives in, those IT giants, will be the ones who directly or indirectly will exercise supreme authority. But unlike the state, they are not bound by data and privacy ethic. Uncontrolled by the state, they are becoming the sole shapers of public opinion. And one would have to be blind not to realize that only sufficiently progressive information passes their censorship, All else falls victim to the digital totalitarianism. And this opens, of course, a wide avenue for potential interference, from manipulating elections to discrediting political sides or leaders. And the processes I have just described in this talk are vividly present in party politics as well, at least in Europe, but I'm sure in the US as well. A new political coordinate system has largely transformed the traditional left versus right divide. It is the globalist versus sovereignist fault line. International and local, federalist and sovereignist, multicultural and national come face to face in the political confrontation of the 21st century. But whatever we call the new dimensions of this political division, what is common to all approaches is that one side sees the foundation of the so-called bright future in eventually fusing transnational meta-organizations, while the other side finds proper order in a sense of locality and traditional social institutions. And there is a factor, however, that shows very clearly how, at least in one way, the traditional left versus right divide has been transcended by the new politics of this century. Namely, several European political formations, formerly of the center-right, nominally bourgeois, Christian, or conservative, have drifted to the progressive globalist side, and as a result, they almost automatically support illegal mass migration, the departure from Christian heritage of Europe's national cultures, homosexual marriage, queer theory, genderism, abortion, euthanasia, and of course, drug liberalization. And many parties went down this road from the UK through the Benelux countries and Germany all the way to Scandinavia. Attitudes towards sovereignty, Europe's Christian past, and postmodern multiculturalism have led to the emergence of a new divide of the European right as well. The same processes, of course, was far less dramatic on the European left, as they have long since abandoned their labor identity in favor of promoting the interests of new marginal or minority identity groups. Ladies and gentlemen, of course, my country, Hungary, not for the first time in her long history, has found itself at the center of the struggle for the monopoly of interpretation of the world. And as so often before in the millennium-long history of the Hungarian state, her people choose the harder road of adhering to our national and Christian heritage over the much easier one of conforming to the mainstream. Ever since the Viktor Orbán-led Fidesz party and Christian Democrats came to power with a two-thirds majority in 2010, Hungary has been under a dual external assault. Ideological pressure from the West, migration from the East. The former, of course, started earlier, and the strict anti-immigration measures adopted by the government have only increased the enmity of the elites of Western Europe and of the bureaucrats of the European Union. The very reason for the original antipathy goes back to the first days of the new sovereignist Hungarian government elected back first time in 2010. The previous socialist liberal government has mismanaged the economy to the point where the country found herself at the verge of bankruptcy. The new government, the new conservative government, however, rejected the EU's economic diktat, and what made matters far worse for the Brussels observer, managed to stabilize the economy despite the restrictive recipes offered by the EU, help it back on its feet. Where GDP growth is concerned, Hungary is once again among the leading countries in the Union. Further, constitutional legal measures taken by the government only contributed to the enmity. First of all, the adoption in 2011 of Hungary's first democratic constitution, the so-called fundamental law, which enshrines, among others, the protection of Christianity, the importance of national identity, control over our sovereignty, the elevated importance attributed to family and having children, and of course, that marriage is a union of a man and a woman. Beyond the revolution in the sphere of public law, a wide-ranging social welfare program was adopted, but executed with a fiscal conservatism, which further increased the popularity of the governing parties. Parallelly, the overbearing media presence enjoyed by the leftists and liberals dissipated. Public support for the leftist and liberal parties who had previously teamed up with the far right plummeted. They remain low in the polls despite international efforts to help them. And following the 2014 general elections, the government, armed with a renewed two-thirds majority, set out to counter the flood-like flow of migration on the Balkans route. Parliament tightened regulations pertaining to migration and elevated the principle of the first safe country into the constitution. A new southern border fence was built, and all this served to further enrage officials of Brussels and other international so-called partners. Passions ran high among the academic intelligentsia, Western opinion journalists, and, naturally, think one, among the human rights fundamentalist NGOs. But ostracizing Hungary, however, backfired. The governing parties, who had focused political communication on the assault on the nation's security and sovereignty from the West as well as the East, won another two-thirds majority in the last year's parliamentary elections and achieved the best percentage-wise result on the continent during the EP election this May. Further political attacks on Hungarian sovereignty in the guise of legal procedures and through creeping legislation seem to have failed, or at least halted for a moment. However, the so-called Family Protection Action Plan, introduced this February in Hungary, has come under fresh attacks. Not merely because, allegedly, it conserves the so-called patriarchal social relations or the traditional role of women in the family, but also because it encourages Hungarians to start families and have children. And this latter is a mortal sin in the eyes of those suffering from climate derangement syndrome or eco-anxiety. Because, according to them, the carbon footprint of the so-called white Westerner is way too large, so the eco-friendliest behavior is not to have children, but encourage abortion labeled as Planned Parenthood and solve democratic problems through migration. Let us have no doubt, it is our absolute duty to protect this God-given earth, but this climate hysteria, wrapped in the green on the outside, red on the inside, guys, is just another political tool. Just another political tool to globalize problems quite resolvable locally. As a result, this is another attempt to limit the action radius of state sovereignty in the name of planetary standards. And just as during the Mongol, the Ottoman, or the Soviet communist oppression, Hungary will not surrender and will try once again to become a protective wall for Christian Europe. As Prime Minister Viktor Orbán of Hungary recently stated, quote, "Today the Hungarian state rests on the foundations not of liberal democracy, but of Christian democracy." Those are the words of Mr. Orbán. Applause him. Quote, "Democracy, yes. Liberalism, no. Instead of liberal freedom, we configure the state in the spirit of Christian freedom. In politics, Christian freedom is not something abstract. It is a very specific, understandable, and tangible. Yes. Patriots instead of citizens of the world. Love of country instead of internationalism. Marriage and family instead of popularizing homosexual relationships. Protecting our children instead of drug liberalization, Hungarian children instead of immigrants, Christian culture instead of multicultural confusion, order and security instead of violence and terrorism, and unification of the nation instead of the betrayal of the nation. This is Christian freedom." End of quote. So Western civilization, including Europe, must be re-traditionalized or reimagined, perhaps this time not from the West, but from Central Europe. Hungary stabilized its economy and created a rarely seen domestic political stability. The ruling conservative parties won all national elections, namely 11 in a row since 2006, and gained a supermajority in the Hungarian parliament 3 times, thanks to the will of the Hungarian people. While stabilizing the country and fighting the legal proxy wars or hybrid wars launched by the global juristocracy, the government also successfully created a counter-narrative to the progressive mainstream based on the conservative values of God, homeland, family, and work. And of course, it may so happen that we are alone in this fight and we end up failing. Or perhaps we do have allies, or may have them in the near future, but we still cannot prevail. Or of course, hopefully, it may so happen that together we are strong enough so we might turn the cart of our civilization rushing towards the abyss back into the lane of normalcy. Because we all know, united we stand, divided we fall. But one thing is for certain. Our conscience will be clean and we will be able to look into the mirror having kept our character intact. Please bear in mind the teaching of Jesus Christ. Every nation divided against itself is brought to desolation, and every city or household divided against itself shall not stand. God bless you all. God bless our countries. Thank you very much.